I am extremely excited to present, first off, our panel starting from all the way to the extreme left. We have Martin Daniel from Airbnb. We have Dominic Kalish, who is here at St. Mary's as an adjunct professor. We then have Stan. He's asked me to call him Stan, so I'm happy to call him Stan Sobolewski, who many of you have heard at the previous session, panel session earlier today. We then have Shankar Subramaniam, who is also an adjunct professor here, but also is a principal at Qatar. We're then followed with Scott Tracy. Scott is also an adjunct professor here, but also works at Visa Analytics. So thank you for joining us, Scott. And last but not least, we have Tina Zhang, who is a professor of finance, excuse me. I'm giving her a new discipline. But Tina is here also to talk about her research in the area of big data. The reason why we put this panel together today was not to have people sit up here and talk to you. We're essentially flipping the panel on you. So we're going to have them give you just a very brief spiel on what it is they do in the realm of big data in terms of the opportunities and hurdles they have in their research or in the practice areas and fields that they come from, but primarily to give you a chance after their 5-minute spiel to meet up with them at the tables which are behind you and have a chance to have a real dialogue with them. So what we will do after they've had their time up here is we'll all move back to the 3 tables. We'll make this really informal, really interactive. That's the idea, is to have a really great interaction going. I am going to try to take as little airtime as possible up here and allow our panelists to actually have a chance to tell you a little bit about themselves, but then really get into the fine-grained details of what they do. So right now, we're going to start with Martin. So Martin, the clicker is yours, I believe. So thank you so much. No? Oh. Mary is the clicker, so Mary is going to actually be the clicker for the moment. But Martin, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
You can press down on the button.
Is this working? Yeah, this is working. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. My name is Martin. I am a data scientist at Airbnb. I'm very excited to be here. Super passionate about what data can actually do for social good. And I wanted to just jump right in and give you a few examples, both inspired by my work and what I do outside my work. And I would love for you after to kind of talk to me and then maybe go into some more interactive kind of into more interactive sessions. So I just wanted to start with a story. I don't know if you can go to the next slide. Yeah, so as you can guess from my accent, I'm not from the US, actually from France. I'm one of those bad immigrants. And I arrived like 2 years ago in San Francisco. And when I arrived, I stayed obviously in an Airbnb, right? I stayed in Hayes Valley in the center of San Francisco at Stuart and Amanda. And Stuart and Amanda are 2 amazing hosts we have on Airbnb. You can see 2 things from their listing. The first thing that they do is they actually give 20% of what they make on Airbnb on local charities. The other thing that they do is they actually use their money to pay the rent. On Airbnb. And at Airbnb, what we do is all our work is actually trying to understand what our community is doing and be inspired by those hosts and trying to replicate this into products that could serve the whole community. And so the first thing we did last week we had this hackathon, and this story kind of inspired this tool, this donation tool we are scaling globally to every host, so they can give small percentage of what they make on Airbnb to local charities. The other thing that they did is, if you can go to the next slide, is by actually, this idea of paying their rent, you can actually think about a product, something that could gather the data we have on Airbnb, as well as open data, from HUD, notably the rent, to compute where is the smartest, place to host an Airbnb to pay the highest share of your rent. All right. And so this is a tool that is open that I built. I had the pleasure to demo this at the White House, a few months ago. So you can go to opportunity.airbnbaction.com. And it's very simple, right? It's a very simple tool. It's basically tell you how much of your rent you can basically offset depending on where you live. If you move or if you go to the next place, check this tool, and you can basically host on Airbnb. Can we just go up? Sorry. Go up. Previous slide. Yeah. What we can see basically is like we basically take the data of like the nightly earnings on Airbnb, and then we just like join this by the zip code, on the price of the rents. And so you can get this ratio of like where is the smartest to actually rent on the Airbnb. If you can go to the next slide. Another kind of idea that was, interested, and it was like back in 2012, during the hurricane in New York, was this idea of host people on the platform for free. So, like when you have a disaster, in a given area, an Airbnb, hosts can basically open their homes to welcome, more people. Again, I was in Paris during the Paris attack, a few years ago, 1.5 years ago, and basically what happened in the community was pretty amazing. Like people started opening their homes for people that were in the Paris attack, in the 11th district, to be, rescued. And so I think this is another very nice, example of like how you can be inspired by a community and create like a tool that is actually, scaled, globally to, people. And this tool is actually pretty cool because like, 51 crises have been, like this tool was used for 51 crises, and 3,000 homes were, opened by using this kind of idea. And again, so this is the same kind of idea of like, talking with your community, talking with your host. You can be inspired. You can create new product, new services based on this that could be like serve a more social good. Last example, something I'm very excited about. It's Tomorrow. So Tomorrow, it's not related to Airbnb. Tomorrow is a non-profit. I'm a contributor to this non-profit. We are basically 100 open source, contributor developers working on this. And the idea is like to try to quantify the impact we have on the environment, and using open data and data that are already available to quantify and give like information to people. And so we built this first tool. You can check this out, like electricity map. So next slide, sorry. If you can go to the next slide. Yeah, okay. So if you go to electricitymap.org, this is a website that we built a few months ago, and that's like, it's getting very popular, like more than 100,000 visits a day. It's basically like a real-time map of the carbon emissions of your electricity production in European countries. And we are the first kind of tool to do this real-time, so we both expose the sun exposure as well as the wind, and the real-time emissions of the electricity of European countries. So what you can see on the map is like, I mean, we can talk like more in details if you're interested in the sessions. Basically, this is displaying the carbon intensity of the electricity production for each country. So you can see like the Poland, for instance, is like 600 gram of CO2 per kilowatt-hour produced, where you have Norway, for instance, is only 36 gram of carbon per kilowatt-hour produced. And so you can have this kind of data to kind of start understanding what's going on. You can go in past, you can see what's going on, what's the correlation of like the winds, the sun, etc. The other thing you can do is we are compiling this data. Because we are amassing this data in an API, you can actually use this data yourself to run your analysis or to do your own things. And so we are partnering with like universities, with like researchers to use the data and to actually come up with interesting analysis. So those are just like cases that interesting. If you are interested to learn more, I'm happy to discuss this with you.
Thank you so much, Martin. Got here, we are a panel of immigrants. So thank you for that interesting introduction. And for those of you who would like to start off with that panel that Martin's going to be leading, that would be the one with the collaboration and partnerships with the spotlight on Airbnb. The next panelist we have is Dominic Kalish. Go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, I just thought that for 5 minutes, like creating a lot of slides that you try to follow, what maybe not the best productive way to talk about. So what I would like you to do is like try to imagine what I try to explain now. So we had, or you had here a couple of months ago, the American election, right? And the interesting thing was that a lot of polls actually had been wrong with the outcome. Like a lot of people thought, well, we just go ahead and ask, who will you elect? And a lot of people were not confident enough to say, well, I'm for Trump, I will elect Trump. So therefore, the outcome of the election was quite surprising to a lot of the folks. One of the reasons why that was the case was we had to actually in the last panel, like that the data itself was biased towards social expectancy. So you only answer to people you know in a way they expect you to answer. So in order to go around that challenge, because in Europe there will be a couple of elections in the next couple of months, like France will have one, and Germany will have one, and it's not that you're alone. Like, we have our own challenges with, let's say, a little bit more radical party here was a Le Pen movement, and we was a AfD. But the idea is there a better way in actually to assess what people actually really think? What are people actually really talking about? So the thing that I try to do right now, I try to working on right now, is to harvest the social media communication that actually talks about politics. So the first step that I'm doing right now is to collect a lot of tweets from Germany right now that talks about politics, that talks about different parties. So we have a multi-party system, so it's a little bit more complicated than just having two. And the amount of data that you collect every day goes roughly between 10, 15,000. So that doesn't sound a lot, but if you add it up for a full month, and that full month over the whole year that you have actually that election competition between the parties, that will actually sum up to quite a bit of data. So, and this data want to be analyzed as well, right? You want to know, okay, what are they talking about? Which tweets are positive? Who actually tweets a lot of positives? What are actually the distribution of a let's say fake news or maybe real news in the network? And that actually causes a lot of challenges from a computational side, because even though the data, the massive amount of data is not in a petabytes as you would assume when you talk about big data, but the complexity that gained through the network structure that this data oppose, means like who follows whom and who retweets which person and so on, actually opposes the challenge of come up with the right calculations. So why do I do that? One of the things is, well, just curiosity from a scientific standpoint. But what I think is even more important, and that's actually ties a little bit more in for this conference, is I want to do something that gives politicians and people who are interested in politics and tool at the on the hand and say, okay, which people are actually tweeting right now very positively or very negatively about a certain topic, and can give an answer to that. You can actually respond to a tweet. Right now, if you have a Twitter account, you only see the tweets that either you follow or people who answer you, right? And politicians right now just tweeting one way, and if you follow Trump, you can answer him. But all the other people that are connected with that, that are also talking about immigration ban, or that are talking about Jews or Muslims and so on in a negative way, you typically don't hear so much about them. And that tool, when you analyze if that is positive or is that negative for a certain topic, give them all the tweets, or the most negative ones, and you can see, okay, which one are actually negative. And let me answer that. When you see a negative tweet saying, well, we should kick out every Muslim, that you can say, no, that's wrong. That is actually an interaction, not a one-way communication anymore. So I think using data analytics, using sentiment analysis, that's what we're talking about, to do actually something good, to do something politically, in my opinion, correct, that should be the underlying part of this project. It's in the very first steps right now because, well, it's not very easy to do. But that's kind of the vision that I try to do here at this university. And that's what I try to do with you if you're a student and interested in that. I'm happy to talk with you more.
Thank you so much, Dominic. Dominic is going to be at the table where he's going to talk about research and the opportunities and challenges around research on big data. Thank you so much, Dominic. Moving on now to Stan Sobolewski, who's actually a collaborator of Dominic's. So we've heard him in the previous panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. So my name is Stanislav, or Stan Sobolewski, and my accent comes from a small Eastern European country of Belarus. So yes, I'm also one of the immigration lobby, the member of immigration lobby here. I started my academic career from studying, teaching, and researching fundamental mathematics for over a decade. And later on, I decided to transition, partly transition, to a modern field of data science. Now I'm a faculty at New York University at the Center for Urban Science and Progress, and also a research affiliate at the MIT Sensible City Lab. So what we are doing at NYU, at CUSP, first of all, is actually using New York City as a living lab and the classroom at the same time. Because what we are teaching our students, and actually the cohort is quite is already pretty large. We have approximately 100 master students every year. That's a new program, Master of Urban Informatics, by the way. We're teaching them to understand, collect, and leverage the whole variety of big urban data that is now being created and collected by the cities for urban research, for urban innovation, for making our cities more sustainable, more resilient, more efficient, and basically better places to live in. And certainly here we face multiple challenges. The data, first of all, of course, data availability. The data is available to a large extent now from open city portals, from private vendors, from many companies and research groups that make them accessible, but even more data is unavailable, of course. And even those data sets that are available are often heterogeneous. Not all of them are high quality data. Some have limited representativity. So certainly, as many data scientists used to say, curating the data set, actually getting to the point when you can start doing some analytics, often takes up to 90–95% of the whole time and resource of the data science project, and most of the people who disagree with this estimate actually disagree because they think it's too low. So this is true, and in the first place, certainly in our academic mission and in our research, what we do, we overcome those difficulties, and I know we'll be talking about those during the panel. So certainly challenges are paramount. So also, the other challenge that we are facing, and we are teaching our students to overcome, is actually coming up with the unbiased insights based on those data sets. Because data is there, but since the data is imperfect, it's very important to actually use the appropriate analytic techniques to get some knowledge out of that. And it's not that straightforward. Often you take the data set. I mean, I actually had an example in my class on that, because I'm teaching applied data science class and also machine learning for cities, and every class actually culminates with the students coming up with their projects, presenting them, and every project is supposed to take one or several urban data sets and ask an interesting question and come up with some insights and knowledge based on those. And I saw actually two groups who taken same public safety data and came up with completely opposite, so-called data-driven, but completely opposite opinions on whether stop and frisk was actually efficient. So, and I mean, both projects actually could benefit from some further elaboration, of course. And I mean, and the bottom line is still unknown, by the way. But what we're teaching them is actually to apply, to be mindful to the limitations and possibilities of those techniques. And that's another challenge, the big one, perhaps the huge one. Quality of data, all those challenges are out there. So what kind of data I'm talking about? Well, urban data, we all probably know the examples, like taxi data, for instance. It's open in many cities. 3-on-1 data, 3-on-1 complaints, whenever the city has 3-on-1 system implemented, this data is often public. But basically, classifying those data, I would put them in two different categories. Opportunistic data sets, the data sets that are collected because people are using certain type of digital system to interact through, and that's why the data is collected, not for the primary purpose of the project, I would say, not for the urban purpose. And deliberate digital sensing data, when we put the sensor out there deliberately for collecting the data for the urban applications. And actually we have both here. So opportunistic data sets, cell phone data, of course aggregated. We don't talk about individuals here, we don't talk about the any private information. We basically talk about the aggregated flows of communication from point A to point B. Vehicle GPS traces, credit card data, again, no individuals, just overall flows. Social media data, you can either scrape it, either go and purchase it from Twitter directly. Taxi, public transportation usage, waste collection, disposal, energy use, water use, lots of data, pedestrian counts. For example, if you've been to New York and if you saw a trash can named Big Belly, it doesn't only compresses the trash in a nice way so that more trash can fit in, it also collects the data about how the bin is being filled, when the trash is disposed, and also it can, if you install a sensor, it can count how many people pass by.
Stan, in the interest of time, I'm going to let
Sure,
you
yeah.
carry on later, but thank you so much. I'm sure people
Yeah.
who are interested in learning more about Stan's research can join him at the table later. Let's move on to Shankar Subramaniam.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Natasha. Shankar Subramanian. I'm a management consultant with Cutter Associates. My clients are all in investment management. I realize investment management is a bit of a bad word in certain circles here, so I'm not going to talk about investment management. What I'm really going to talk about is data visualization, both as it comes to big data as well as not so big data. As I said, yes, a lot of my clients do require and seek big data, collect big data, collect tons of data to make better investment decisions. Now, one of the things that they would like to do, however, the investment decisions are not easy to make, or it's not just investment decisions, any decisions that you make based on the data that you collected is probably going to be very difficult unless you're able to visualize this data. So visualization is a very important component of any analysis, any collection. So, and it applies to just as much to big data as it applies to any form of data. So the reason it is important, and there's a whole science around this visualization itself, that there are certain principles that you need to adhere to before you visualize it in a more effective manner, meaning that it's based on human perceptions. The humans are attuned to a certain way of looking at things, a certain way of recognizing pictures, graphs, and they do that a lot better than just textual data or rows and rows of normal data. Stan referred to this. Sorry, can you? Okay. Okay. So Stan referred to, before you start visualizing data, there's a whole bunch of processing, collection, validation, extraction, transformation, aggregation, analysis. You need to do a whole bunch of that before you start to visualize data. And Stan, you alluded to this, there's about forming roughly 95% of the effort is spent towards that. It's a very important part of it. Now, we may argue about and debate about whether it's 95% or 90% or 99%, but nevertheless, what you cannot discount is there is a fair amount of effort that needs to be put towards the visualization part of it. Otherwise, a lot of what you do out here will likely be not that effective because you're unable to derive business insights from just presentation of data in a raw or a form that's not entirely visual and that's not entirely understandable to your audience. Okay. I want to give you an example of why visualization is important and perhaps some of the ideas around what represents good visualization. Now, this is one, hopefully people at the back can read this thing. So on the y-axis, you have a life expectancy, and this is plotting different countries, the life expectancy of residents in the different countries. The x-axis is the income, per capita income. So one of the things that is readily obvious is that, yes, the higher the per capita income, the higher the life expectancy, and you probably can see that this graph has a visual depiction of that life expectancy, that, yes, you have better access to healthcare and so on and so forth, so you live longer. Now, but that's not the only thing that this is visualizing, because it's the size of each of, this is something called a bubble chart. The size of each of these bubbles represents the population of each of those countries. So you'll see there are a couple of, there's a blue bubble and there is a red bubble. The blue bubble and red bubble, they are the two most populous countries in the world, India and China. And then the color scheme also represents a certain amount of, it represents the region in which each of these countries belongs to. So when you see these insights, you can see that, yeah, there are countries that form in a certain region that seem to have a higher life expectancy as well as a higher GDP. And again, that's somewhat probably obvious. It's a very simplistic example, and this is not, again, big data. However, if you were to try to represent this any other way, and if you looked at the raw data out here, oops. Okay. If you look at the raw data, you're going to see a bunch of columns: country, region, life expectancy, per capita income, population, and so on. And you'll see maybe 200 rows, 300 rows. And it's rather difficult to derive any viable insights from a row of 200 or 300 rows of data with a bunch of numbers. And so whereas you see it in this graph, it's a more elegant way of looking at it. You can draw the business insights more easily. Now, and that's one. And again, there are many ways you can represent this, but if you try to represent this in a bar chart, you would be failing miserably. So there are clever ways of representing this data. So it's necessary to pay attention to how you visualize and what are the techniques you visualize, to use to visualize this data. Just another example. Sorry. Again, this is slightly larger data, and this talks about the demographics of US population. If you see, this is a representation of where you find different people of different ethnic backgrounds. And again, you can see the blue ones represent white, the colored ones. And again, the density of population means the thicker you have bands, it seems to represent a denser population. Now again, I wouldn't say this is still big data. You'll have the raw data for this is about 300 million rows. That's the population of this country. And you'll have the race and city and corresponding to each resident. It probably is in the region of maybe terabytes, but certainly not yet in the big data range. But even then, you can see that there is a certain inherent complexity in how you represent this, and perhaps you're better off trying to do some pre-processing before you figure a way to represent this big data. Okay, so those are a couple of examples where visualization is going to be rather effective in how you can represent big data.
Thank you, Shankar. I'm going to let that be the teaser for,
Okay.
for folks to come to your
Okay.
table.
Okay, sounds good.
So Shankar is going to be at the table that talks about tools and techniques. I want to make sure that everybody has enough time to talk to all of you. But at this point, we're going to move over to Scott Tracy. Scott.
Great, thank you, and I'll try to keep my comments brief. So at Visa, I work with a team that does modeling to try to prevent fraud. And one of the primary reasons I joined Visa was actually to get exposure to big data. And so one of the projects I've been involved in since I joined, and that was about 2 years ago, was creating profiles of accounts based on transaction data. That's actually one of the challenges of being a network. We just see the transaction. We don't actually have any of the personal information associated with an account, which can be predictive, but all we see is that transaction data. So trying to create profiles of that transaction history for an account, and then when a new transaction comes in, we can bump it up against that profile and say, does this look like a typical transaction for this account? Is it in a zip code that we typically see this account transacting in? Does the amount seem to be in, kind of in the ballpark of what this account typically purchases? Is it in a merchant category that this account typically shops in? And so we can use that, compare that incoming transaction with the historical profile to get a sense of how likely that transaction is to be fraudulent. And so at a high level, that's what I've been working on for big data. For modeling, actually, we probably could have done that with historical techniques, SAS or SQL, but to actually get it into production, if we were trying to create those profiles across all of our account base, we really need big data techniques to be able to do that. And so when I think about the challenges for me coming from, again, a fairly traditional banking environment into a big data environment, one of the biggest challenges, a lot of things are actually the same. So big data is still data. And so a lot of some of the other earlier presenters mentioned, you still got to worry about, quality of your data, right? What are the issues with it? Are there any biases in how it was collected or how it's been stored? Applying domain knowledge to that data to actually be able to extract useful information out of it. So all of that is, it's the same, right? The challenge of big data is, right, the scale, the size of the data. And so thinking about the biggest change for me is, my coding had to become a lot more efficient to be able to scale. Previously, if my code ran for 15 minutes instead of 10 minutes, that's not a big deal. I've got 5 more minutes for my coffee break. But with big data, if I'm not very efficient in how I'm coding and really coding for that specific problem that I'm trying to address with that specific set of data, as opposed to 10 minutes to 15 minutes, it could be hours to days, or potentially my code might not even run. So I think that's been the biggest change for me, is just having to be a lot more efficient in how I operate.
Thank you so much, Scott. And I'm sure everybody is going to be interested in hearing more about fraud. But you will be joined by Shankar at the table that talks about tools and techniques. So I'm sure you're looking forward to that. And last but not least, the other woman on the panel, Tina Zhang.
Thank you. Can I have a slide, please? Hi, good afternoon. I'm Tina Zhang. I'm finance faculty at St. Mary. And when finance meets big data, there are many innovative products. And for example, right now, the new trend is about robo-advisors. In the future, if you are Bank of America's account user or Wells Fargo's account users, you maybe talk to some robots about your financial advisors. And today, I will spend more time talking about the real-time financial sentiment index, which I have a research project on that. So that's why I'm quite passionate about that. So I think Dominic already mentioned something about real-time sentiment index. And so this real-time financial sentiment index, that's based on web data. For example, the structured business news, corporate reports like 10K, and also like government documents. Most importantly, the data will be retrieved from social media, like our favorite Twitters and Facebook. And there are two very good examples about the financial sentiment index. One is the social media sentiment stock market index. That index was the first social media index. It launched around 2 years ago in May 2015. And then the provider, the company market the profit that, okay, they use the Twitter's social media to follow the Dow 30 companies. And they try to categorize the different modes from social media and use these kind of social media modes to predict the stock return for the Dow 30s. And they have been available to Bloomberg Terminal. And in the last 2 years, people seems to feel this sentiment index is quite reliable to predict the stock return for the Dow 30s. Okay. Another example that's ESG data provided by the True Value Labs. You probably already joined the first panel, and Hendrik is the co-founder and CEO of True Value Labs. So the True Value Labs use the machine learning and AI technology to look more than 8,000 different companies, to cover more than 30,000 resources, to provide, I think, 14 more categories of the ESG data. And the ESG means the environmental, sustainability, and governance data. And the advantage of the ESG data provided by True Value Lab, next slide, please. Okay. Is because of their AI machine learning technology, they will be able to collect the unstructured data. So as many of the panelists talked about big data today, and every second right now, internet generates 50,000 gigabyte data every second. And 90% of the data is unstructured, which means could be like social media, chat, modes, pictures, videos, phone calls, and a lot of health image data. And so that's why that's a big challenge for the data collection. And thanks for the talent team of True Value Lab, they were able to collect the unstructured data and use 12 seconds to produce the sentiment data for ESG, for the environmental, sustainability, and governance. And we started the project around 2015. At that time, the accuracy of their data already reached 80% compared to the human intelligence. With the feedback from our paper, and the data accuracy had been further improved because it's the machine learning learned from the human being as well. And that's why I feel very excited to have this research opportunity to use the data and collaborate with my colleagues. I see my colleagues, Greg Bella and Jeanne Holm over there. We try to use the True Value's ESG data to predict stock return. And this real-time financial sentiment data provide a huge opportunity to ESG study and provide a huge opportunity to investment. Because we know traditional index, like the Morgan Stanley Corporate Index, MSCI provide ESG scores and ratings, but they provide the ratings maybe on like monthly base. They will not be able to tell you the real-time rating for every company. And with the ESG real-time data, we try to find the correlation between the real-time financial sentiment data and stock abnormal returns. We were lucky to identify the correlation. And then we are still spending huge time to rule out the possible spurious correlation, which is part of the biggest research challenge for us. The spurious correlation means, okay, maybe that's the wrong causality. It's not because of the ESG index generate or cause the stock market return, but vice versa. Another possibility is that there may be some hidden driving factors and driving the stock market movement and also driving the ESG index. Without identifying the hidden factors, it's hard to argue that's the true relationship between the ESG index and the stock market return. So we are spending a lot of time on that. The last challenge we face is not for only our research, but for all the financial innovative products like the robo-advisor or sentiment index. All the new products are based on the models and the series, typically pointing to long-term. But whether this long-term predicted model, predicted products will be work for every second in the real time, we don't know. So that's why I think we need more time to fully evidence the relative novelty of financial new products. Yes, I'm
Thank you so
done.
much, Tina. Can we give all our panelists a round of applause at this time? Thank you so much. This is the perfect opportunity, now that you have a sense of what they do, to ask them even deeper questions about the insights, the opportunities, and challenges of using big data. At the first table over there, you can meet with Tina, with Stan, and with Dominic. They will talk about research and the challenges and opportunities of doing research on big data. The table in the middle, you will have both Shankar and Scott there with you to talk about tools and techniques, as Shankar had demonstrated earlier. And at the third table to my right over there, you will have Martin talking to you about potential collaborative opportunities with a spotlight on Airbnb. You can choose which table you want to go to first, but you can have an opportunity to meet up with all the panelists, because you'll have approximately 15 minutes at each table to ask your questions and get your insights and meet other people at those tables. So at this point, I'm going to encourage you to go to the tables you'd like to be at. First come, first serve with those chairs. Otherwise, just mill around, and I will give you that 15-minute warning. Thank you so much.
Discussion about nonprofits and how you work with nonprofits, from the example that Martin shared with being able to encourage the hosts to donate some of the funds, to being able to respond to issues and work with nonprofits when there's emergencies, and being able to, it's not a set program, but really just the responsiveness and being able to use the tools that Airbnb already has to be able to do that.
To Martin, thank you again so much. Can we give him a round of applause? Thank you again for joining us. We're looking forward to some collaborations with Airbnb in the future. Thank you again. Turning it over to Tomas Gomez, who has summaries for us from the tools and techniques table.
There was a very rich conversation here. There was some talk about what makes big data and the 3 V's, volume, velocity, and value of the data. There was quite some talk about the different tools that are used in industry, at the processing stage, Hives and Hadoop and MapReduce, and then at the analytical stage, SAS and R and others. And then at the visualization stage, things like Tableau and Click. And, but also some of the conversation was, it's not about one single tool. It's about using the right tool for the right processes, and each one is good for something. There was also a lot of talk about the kind of skill sets that are useful in this field, and how important it is to have domain knowledge beyond the technical knowledge. And I think that's something that is overlaps with what that other table was discussing. Coding is going to take you only so far. Much of the value add is in connecting that to the domain knowledge and the right kind of questions, so that a sophisticated user can actually use that for decision making. There was also talk about what takes the most effort, and it seems that there was some agreement that a lot of effort and time is dedicated to data. As I think Scott put it very well, getting the data together is something that is a big task, and the rest, once you get that together, then the rest is relatively straightforward, relatively. Okay, and there was also some comments about data security and how important that is for organizations, and how to keep it, and the role of cloud services and cloud storage in keeping that the data secure. Am I missing anything, Scott, Sankaran? All right. Okay, so that was it. Okay, thank you, and thank you.
And to Scott, thank you very much. And you know, always task a professor with doing summaries. They do a great job. So thank you for being beyond Saroja's boss. You did a good job there. Thank you. The last table that we have over here is where Yuan is going to summarize what took place at the research table. Thank you, Yuan.
Hi, we're the table of research. We talked about opportunities and challenges that is facing the big data research. And we're not the biggest table, but we're the most dedicated table. In fact, our first table lasted 2 rounds. People just want to stick around, don't want to leave. So basically, we talked about most of our conversation centered around how to process natural language processing. How do we filter through the so many big quantities of natural texts, trying to find some meaning out of the texts. And so the True Value Lab scholars here have really talked about how they use natural language processing, how they rely on machine learning, and how they fine-tune their methods, trying to focus on both getting the credibility of the data, meaning where they locate the data, as well as the quantity of their data. We also talked about how to capture the financial sentiments from social media data, like Twitter feeds and other social data from social networks. And then we were curious about how long does it take for the market to read the data, and how might our analysis, our research results, findings, may then feed back to the market reactions, and then kind of shape the market sentiment or people's behavior, stock market changes, price changes, and all simultaneously. So it's a very complicated process, as it is always have been in research. The third table got into a conversation about coding and how machine, and in the future, the coders will probably be replaced by automation, and I was new to that, and I wasn't able to really kind of shed any insight into that. But all in all, our research table has really generated some very good insights, and research is the foundation of research really can shed light to our daily activities, and so I hope students in the crowd and as well as practitioners will benefit from and will really pay attention to more research.
Thank you so much. much, Yuan, and thank you to our panelists here, Tina, Stan, and Dominic. We are so grateful to you. We really wanted to create an interactive panel to make sure that we weren't just talking to either practice or to research. We wanted to try to get a sense for how those different arenas actually inform each other. So we hope you got a sense of that. And as I said, if you have any more questions for the panelists, or if there were interesting discussions and you want to think of collaborations, we're still around. And so by all means, after our keynote speaker, let's make sure that we hang around for, are you providing any booze, Roja, later? Is there going to be wine? Oh, so. All right, there you go. That's the spirit, literally and figuratively. Thank you all, and I encourage you to stick around and listen to our keynote speaker and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Saroja.
Thank you, Natasha. Give Natasha a big hand. She did a great job with